The rain slammed against the windshield as if the sky itself was grieving with him. Jack's hands tightened around the wheel of his battered pickup truck, its headlights barely slicing through the heavy curtain of water. Another interview behind him, another empty promise. "We'll be in touch." His clothes clung to his skin, still damp from the hours spent waiting, and his wallet held nothing but a worn photograph of his daughter. In the back seat, 6-year-old Lily slept peacefully, her tiny fingers curled around a tattered stuffed rabbit. Jack glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his gaze heavy with affection and sorrow. She was all he had left. Since losing his wife 2 years ago, the rest of his life had unraveled. The home gone, the job lost, the savings drained, even his self-belief had slipped through his fingers. But not Lily. Never her. As he turned onto the winding road that led to their small, run-down one-bedroom rental, his grip on the wheel grew tighter. The wipers groaned across the glass, their rhythmic squeal marking time in a symphony of struggle. Every day was a battle not to sink beneath the weight of despair. He had to stay strong, at least in front of Lily. She couldn't see how close he was to breaking. The heater sputtered weakly, sending out the faintest trace of warmth. Jack exhaled slowly, watching his breath fog up the glass. He didn't know how much longer he could keep this up. The world felt like it had turned its back on him, cold, unfeeling, but he wasn't done fighting. Not yet. Not for her. Then, just when he thought this night had thrown all it could at him, something strange caught his eye along the side of the road, something that made the hair on his neck stand up. As he rounded the bend, his headlights swept across the thick trees crowding the narrow roadside. Amid the rain and shadows, something pale flashed in his peripheral vision. He hit the brakes. The truck slid slightly before grinding to a halt on the muddy shoulder. His heart hammered not with fear but with instinct. Something wasn't right. Careful not to wake Lily, Jack climbed out into the downpour. His boots sank into the drenched ground as he moved toward the white shape. At first, he thought it might be a scarecrow or a discarded mannequin. But as he stepped closer, reality crashed into him like a wave of ice. It was a woman. Soaked through and shackled to a tree, she stood trembling in a shredded wedding gown, her bare feet caked with mud, her arms visibly shaking. Her face was streaked with tears and dirt, and her eyes, wide and haunted, locked onto his with a look that begged for help without saying a word. Jack froze. A knot of disbelief twisted in his chest. "Are you all right?" he called out, his voice nearly lost beneath the roar of the storm. She didn't answer. She didn't move. Jack looked around. No nearby houses, no wrecked car, no hint of anyone else nearby. Just her, abandoned in the rain. All the weight he carried, the unpaid bills, the empty pantry, the constant fear of failing his daughter, shrank in the presence of this stranger's silent suffering. Whoever she was, whatever had happened, she needed help. Without a second thought, he shrugged off his jacket and carefully placed it over her trembling shoulders. "You're safe now," he said quietly, not knowing just how true, or how complicated, those words would become. Because helping her would turn out to be the very thing that saved him. Jack didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. After managing to cut the rusted chain with a long-forgotten tool from the truck's bed, he carried the woman, soaked, silent, and barely conscious, back to their tiny home. Lily stirred as they entered, rubbing her eyes but saying nothing as Jack gently laid the woman on their worn couch and wrapped her in layers of blankets. She murmured only one word before sleep overtook her. "Eliza." The apartment was humble, peeling paint on the walls, a refrigerator that buzzed like it had something to prove, and a heater that only worked when it felt generous. Jack had no business bringing someone else into their world. But there had been something in Eliza's eyes, something shattered yet strong, that reached past his own hurt. He couldn't turn away. The next morning she was sitting at the kitchen table, still silent but watching, alert and awake. Jack offered her a cup of coffee. She accepted with a silent nod, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she took the warm mug. In the days that followed, her words were few, responses brief and careful, never more than what was needed. But she gave what she could in other ways. Quietly, she folded laundry, tightened the loose hinge on a cabinet, and without being asked, stitched up the tear in Lily's well-loved stuffed rabbit. It was Lily who connected with her first. One morning, Jack walked into the living room to find them sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by scattered crayons. Lily was giggling, her laughter ringing out like music. Eliza sat beside her, smiling shyly, as if uncertain whether she was allowed to enjoy the moment. Jack stood frozen for a beat. It was the first time he'd heard real laughter in the house in what felt like forever. The atmosphere in the home began to shift. The air felt lighter, the silence less heavy, less filled with ache. Jack couldn't quite explain it yet, but something delicate had begun to mend. Eliza wasn't just surviving anymore. She was slowly breathing life back into a home that had long forgotten how to feel whole. That night, after Lily had long since gone to bed and the house had settled into the stillness that only comes with deep night, Jack sat at the small kitchen table nursing a cup of lukewarm tea. Eliza stood quietly by the window, her gaze lost in the way the wind stirred the branches outside. Then she spoke, softly, almost like a confession to the dark. "I was supposed to get married that day." Her voice cracked like brittle wood. Jack looked up, a tightness gripping his chest. "I didn't love him. I barely even knew him," she continued, her voice strained. "My family told me love was a luxury, that it was about duty, honor, tradition." She turned to face him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "So I ran. And they found me. Said I had shamed them. So they chained me up and left me there. Said I needed to think about what I'd done." Jack's stomach twisted. Rage and sorrow rose inside him like a tide, but he said nothing at first, stunned by the cruelty of what he was hearing. "I didn't think anyone would stop," she whispered, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I thought maybe I didn't matter enough to be saved." Jack rose slowly, walked over, and rested his hand gently on her shoulder. "You were never beyond saving," he said, voice thick with feeling. "You were waiting for someone who could see you, who knew what you were worth." Tears spilled down her cheeks. Jack's followed a moment later. In that fragile silence, something passed between them. Not sympathy, not rescue, but understanding. Recognition. Two people who had known what it meant to break, and who were learning, slowly, how to believe in something good again. A year later, the little house was still just as small, but now it overflowed with warmth and light. Morning sun streamed through windows scrubbed clean, and laughter echoed from the kitchen like music. Jack stood at the stove flipping pancakes, his once weary face now softened by quiet joy. Across the table, Eliza gently helped Lily braid her hair, her hands sure and loving, her smile unguarded. Jack had found steady work, maintenance at the nearby school. It wasn't flashy, but it paid the bills and gave him a sense of dignity again. And Eliza, no longer the silent woman lost in trauma, had found her voice. She volunteered at a shelter for women, sharing her story with those still trapped in fear and silence. Her pain had become a bridge, her survival a beacon. She had become someone others looked to for strength. Lily never hesitated when introducing her. "This is my mom," she'd say proudly, eyes shining. As if Eliza had always held that title. And maybe, in the ways that mattered most, she had. That evening, after Lily had gone to sleep, Jack and Eliza sat side by side on the porch, their fingers intertwined. They watched the fireflies blink like stars across the darkened yard. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Because they both knew, they weren't meant to fix each other. They had simply made a choice. To love, even with the cracks still showing. And in that quiet, shared choice, they found something unshakable. Voiceover. Sometimes it's the broken who know how to save the broken. And when love is given freely, even from those who have nothing, it has a way of returning, as something close to a miracle.